Right. I think our first speaker is Dr. Ghada Barsoum, Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Public Policy and Administration, American University in Cairo. You're a good friend of ERF, so with that, I'll give you the floor.
Yes. Can I see my presentation?
Take this out.
Thank you, Shireen. Thank you, everyone. I think everybody wanted a bio break after the first session, but we're just pushing that session just without a break. So I hope you can bear with us, or you can just leave the room quickly if you want to. We are focusing on one aspect of social protection. Her Excellency, the Minister, talked about everything. She talked about social assistance. She talked about focus on targeted groups, specific targeted groups. We are basically here focusing on the design issues of social insurance system. Social insurance are contributory systems. In plain language, this is what you pay as you work, and then when you are unable to work, whether for old age, disability, during maternity, this is the money that you have contributed that comes back to you. So that's in a nutshell what we mean by social insurance or contributory social insurance systems. So we focus on design issues. This is my paper with Iran. This is our second paper, actually. Our first paper, we looked at the new legal changes, and in this paper, we're just digging deeper into the legal framework for social insurance systems in Egypt. We have 5 points. We talk about what is happening in the social insurance scheme and the anomalies, and why we think there's a puzzle and we need to continue our focus on social insurance in Egypt. We give you an overview of the system. We make our argument. We have actually 2 arguments. We say that social insurance, the social insurance system is actually challenged by 2 key issues. The first one is what we call legal informality. I'm going to describe what I mean by that. And the second point is what we call costly formality, that formality or joining the social insurance system is very costly, and that's actually by itself is a deterrent for so many people who are eligible to join, leading them not to join. We present data from a multivariate analysis, and we conclude with the key findings and discussion. This is part of our puzzle. This is what we try to say just to motivate the analysis. We have a number of stories in this chart, so I'm just going to use. No, I'm unable to do that. I was going to point, but anyway, I'll just describe what I wanted to point. The bottom dark blue line is the insurance, the level of insurance coverage among private sector workers. So we know that it's always been the case in Egypt that public sector work equates access to social insurance. Not being in the public sector leaves you vulnerable, and the blue line shows that the vulnerability is actually increasing with the decrease of number of people who are covered by social insurance. And you see the curve is going down. Specifically, you see the year 2018, 2019, picking up a little bit after 2020. So this is one line on this chart. And we try to connect that, what is happening with access to social insurance, with what's happening with GDP. And the argument we're seeing that it is erratic. The connection is not that clear. So you think that if you have GDP growth, contributions would grow. But actually, this is not what we're seeing on this chart. So you're seeing GDP growth happening. You see 2019 and 2018 are very important 2 years. Growth happening, but yet social insurance access is not increasing. The top light blue line is for total employment. And it shows you that public sector hiring is actually providing a buffer for access to social insurance in this country. That people in the public sector are the majority, constitute the majority of people who are covered, and without that would be stuck with the access to social insurance would be stuck with the dark blue line at the bottom. We put a line here, which is the implementation of the new law, the new social insurance law that was issued, law number 148, issued in 2014, was actually put in force starting the year 2020. We are seeing an increase after the law. This is what we're seeing in this chart. So this is the story we're trying to unpack. This is the puzzle we're trying to address with our research. One key thing that we like to make as a motivation for the analysis in this paper is that throughout the world, everybody says people are not contributing because they are poor. What we're showing here in this table is there are so many people who are non-poor and yet they're not contributing. So the argument we are making as part of this analysis is that these are systemic issues. There are systemic challenges of people who want to contribute, who can contribute, but they're not contributing. And this is the group of people that we want to address. This is the group of people that we believe are a missed opportunity. These are people who want to contribute. And Her Excellency, the Minister, when she spoke about the delivery person who was injured, had no access to social insurance, had to change the medium of transportation to continue working as a delivery person, this is the group we have in mind. These are people, if you talk to them, they will tell you, we want to contribute to social insurance. These are people who make money. They are primarily in the informal economy, and they have no means to contribute. And this is the core of our analysis in this paper. So we have color-coded this table. So blue, these are people with social insurance access. These are people who are eligible to receive pensions if they are unable to work, and they are in formal public sector employment or former private sector employment. Some of them are poor and some of them are non-poor. We worry about the third column. Still, I'm unable to point with this thing. The third column are informal workers, and the orange are the ones we are focusing on. These are the people who are in informal employment. They are not poor, meaning they have some surplus that they could contribute to social insurance, but they're not. And of course, poor and informal, these are the ones, the yellow are the ones who are eligible for social insurance and social assistance, which is the other arm of any social protection measure, whether it's contributory or non-contributory. So the yellow are eligible for non-contributory social protection schemes. So the implication, and we keep saying this, we are worried. We are worried because of the youth bulge. The youth bulge is now a generation without work contracts. It's a generation without access to social insurance, which means that 10, 20 years down the road, you have a youth bulge that has aged. So you have an aging bulge of people with a very high dependency on the economy and without access to contributory social insurance. These people are going to be the residual that are going to need social assistance, which means that action now is very important in terms of fixing the legal framework to include as many people as possible in the system. Our research question, we are focused on the design. We're focused on design issues. So sometimes our argument can get a bit boring because we talk about the design of the system. What time do you get insurance? How many years you have to contribute? When do you get your pension? Because design, our argument is that design is the name of the game. And I'm very happy that Dr. Mervat Sabrin is here because she's one of the gurus, she's one of the key people who've been part of the design arguments in this part of the world. Our methodology, we rely on analysis of survey data. We use LFS data 2009 to 2021. We also use data from ELMPS. We also did some key informant interviews with self-employed people and employers. Primarily in our earlier work, we've done so many interviews with wage workers. So this phase was particularly focused on the self-employed and informal workers too. All right, so we use the term legal informality. I was fortunate enough to work with Santiago Levy as part of a World Bank project, and he actually coined this term legal informality. So this is when informality is legalized. And I'm going to explain to you what we mean by that. Before I delve into the term of legal informality, just give you a bit of a background. We have the social insurance law, the unified law that was issued in 2019, law 148, which combined 4 separate laws that were in action before then, very old actually, 1975, the law for wage workers, law 79, the law for the self-employed, law 108, 1976. Definitely we were due for an update. We were due for reform from the 70s. And the thinking in the 70s, you look at social insurance design, it's all there designed for people who are working in the public sector. So we definitely needed a facelift. We definitely needed an update on this design. The new law introduced certain parametric changes, reduced the contributions rate, but also changed the level of contribution from previously in the earlier law we had the fixed and the variable income, الأجر الأساسي والمتغير. The new law combined them together but changed the contributions rate that was required, and we analyzed the system and the new parametric changes in our earlier paper. Again, the design of the system, this is what we call a defined benefit. There are fixed rates for payment to employees and employment with a percentage of the income. That's why we call it fixed defined benefit. The benefits are predictable, so you know what you will get depending on the bracket, the income bracket that you've been contributing. You know the percentage. The investment risk and the responsibility is actually shouldered by the government, by the National Treasury, which is very different from contribution benefit systems similar to the US that basically look at how much the money that you've contributed has been invested, and this is what you get at the end. And so the cost of macroeconomic shocks is actually shifted to the sponsorer, which is the government. And because of that, because the government is hedging the risk, you have minimum bounds and maximum bounds. This is by design what is called defined benefit system, and this is a global system. We're very similar to countries in Europe, actually, in some of the countries in Europe in our design structure. This is also funded, which is very important, funded as a pay-as-you-go system. In plain terms, I pay social insurance, and then my mom is getting the benefit, the pension. She was working, she was contributing, but my contributions are covering the pension to my mother, and then when I retire, my children's contribution are going to cover my pension. So it's pay as you go, the system, money coming in, money coming out. This is the argument for illegal informality. Let's see if I can move that thing up. Yes.
We have a couple more minutes.
That's a lot.
Okay.
I don't need more than a couple more minutes. So this is what we haven't read what we mean by legal lack of coverage or legal informality. So for wage workers are obliged to pay contributions, but the liability falls on their employer. So if I'm not paying contributions, it's my employer who is going to pay a penalty. So it's obligatory for regular workers. It's not obligatory for voluntary workers. And included in this, you find old age pension, disability and survival pension, end of service bonus, injury, illness, maternity coverage, unemployment coverage, which is very difficult to get in the system when we analyze it before, and health insurance. If you are an irregular wage worker, you have the right not to be covered, so it's only for regular wage workers. And the employer has the right not to cover me too, so it's not obligatory. The main argument we have is for non-wage workers, the self-employed, the own account workers, the employers, the unpaid, uncontributing family workers. For these, for the self-employed, only 15 occupations, included syndicated workers, are required to pay social insurance. So if I'm not one of these, if I'm self-employed, I'm not one of these, I'm not required and I have no option to pay. If I am self-employed in a non-registered business, I have no means to register, because as we go again in the following sheet, registration, formal registration of a business for the self-employed and the employer is a key precondition. So participation here is voluntary, it's not obligatory, and that's why we use the term legal informality. It's legalized to be informal. The law had a particular focus on informal workers, and it was very progressive to have the law talking about informal workers. And the informal workers, the law lists as many as possible. We categorize them into 9 categories, but it includes وما شابهها. It just includes a lot of terms to refer to people who are within this category. It includes domestic workers, people working in households. Previously, these were not covered by labor regulations, and they're still not covered by labor regulations, but the new law allowed them to join. The problem has been, and this has been our argument, that although the law opened it, the executive guidelines, the bylaws, basically said that you need to have a valid ID, national identification card, that shows your occupation as a domestic worker, which is very difficult to obtain. You need to have an employment history from the civil registry. You need to have a medical certificate. You need to have a birth certificate, which is actually not, it's happening. But then a signed application. We argue, and we've argued that in our previous paper too, that these are very difficult conditions for informal workers to join. We also argue that there has never been enough outreach to promote this to informal workers. And of course, there's no penalty for non-enrollment. I will conclude because Shireen is very upset.
Please.
But for the employers cannot contribute less than their workers, and they have to pay 21% of their income bracket. And there's a lot of analysis that we include looking at the cost benefit of that. If I pay 21% of my income now, what do I get when I retire? So I'll stop here and give the floor to Irene. Thank you.
Thank you. Irene, please. Irene is, yes. Irene Selwanis is an associate professor at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science, Cairo University, and the floor is yours.
I think it's working because I need it. How long do I have, Shireen?
We have.
Because I have very important things to say.
Yes,
okay.
Shorter is great, so.
All right. So I'll be talking about the regular wage workers. The regular wage workers are by law should have coverage, right? So this is like illegal informality here. And they have to be covered. But then what we see in recent years is that. So this is the percent covered among the regular wage workers in the private sector. I'm not talking about the public sector anymore. So the public sector coverage is nearly universal, and the public sector is actually, like I would say, its share is declining over time in total employment. So I'm talking about the private sector regular wage workers who by law have to be covered. Now, I think the pointer should, yeah, it's there, but okay. So 52% of workers, regular wage workers, were covered back in 2009, and this was steady, like fluctuating around 50% are covered. So that is the coverage rate for regular wage workers. But now in 2016, what you see is a sharp decline of 10 percentage points all of a sudden. We're 41, and then a steady decline until 35% only that are covered among regular wage workers in 2021. Now, there is a dotted line here that I'm going to tell you the story of this dotted line, but in a bit. Okay, so there is a dilemma here. These are, so, and what is, by the way, what is the legal definition of a regular wage worker? So a regular wage worker, by law, the law defines a regular wage worker, a worker in a continuous employment relationship for at least 6 months. The good news is that in the data, when we collect labor market data, we actually define also regular wage worker that way. If a worker is in at least 6 months in the same employment with the same employer, he or she is defined as a regular wage worker. And the good news is that we can actually use labor market surveys to understand the coverage patterns, and then our use of data, labor market data, is then validated. If we don't have big data or administrative data, then we can safely rely on nationally representative microdata to understand what happens for the regular wage workers. And I'll tell you what happens to them. As Dr. Ghada said, the employer is the accountable here, is responsible. So the employer is the one who initiates the process, and he has to pay for his part and the worker's part on behalf of the worker, right? But then the worker has to pay his share. And then there is a very pre-qualifier. The business unit of that employer has to be formal. Otherwise, the employer wouldn't be able to cover himself primarily and then cover the workers who work with him, for him. Now, the new law increased the penalty, which is something that is it's in the good direction, right? The penalty was £1 up to £500 under the old law. Now the penalty is very, very strong penalty. A minimum of £30,000 up to £100,000 can be doubled in case of recurrence, but also can potentially lead to jail. So there is a penalty. This is illegal informality. This is a huge compliance gap. Regular wage worker is an issue now. Why their coverage is declining. So to understand that, we had to delve a little bit in the cost of the system, because the design, we have run a battery of investigation for the law, the design. All things seem working perfectly at the legal framework, but then the cost, there is a main challenge here. Now the cost was under the new law is 40% as a total. 26 is the responsibility of the employer. The worker has to pay 14%, but then the employer is the one who initiates everything and who sends the cash to the authority, or the National Organization for Social Insurance. And then in the new law, that was even better. It's declined. The contribution rate is now 29.75, down from 40%, and the share of employer is 18 to 0.75%, and the worker only pay 11%, so it should be good, right? So why is the decline? And then if you can see, the risks against, insured against is very good, is old age disability, I think maybe up to 7 or 8 different life cycle risks. So the program is good, people want it. Why is coverage declining? I've talked a lot about why is coverage, the motivation, but then what is the reason? There is something called a minimum insurable wage and a maximum insurable wage. So the scheme has set a minimum insurable wage and a maximum insurable wage, and these and then that's what the authority uses to calculate contributions. So, for example, if I'm a worker that takes more than this maximum, I'm only taxed for the part that is between the minimum and the maximum. So if I am a worker who takes £5,000 and the maximum is £3,000, I only pay on that part between the minimum and the maximum, the £3,000. And then the remaining thing is not taxed for me. So I'm at an advantage if my wage is above the maximum. And what happens if it is the inverse case? If my wage is below the minimum insurable wage, if my productivity and my wage is like £400, let's say, and the minimum wage is £500, then I'm paying actually a contribution of 14% or 40% on a wage that I don't receive, right? So now take this thought, because we're going into a little bit of math, so I hope you can bear with me. Now, the minimum insurable wage was a low, maybe like bound very low bound, increasing maybe by 7% sometimes, 10% sometimes. The maximum thing would be 15%. And that was been the case since 1975, since the law, right? So in 2009 to 2015, the minimum insurable wage on the basic wage, there was always the distinction between a basic wage and a variable wage, was below £200, increasing yearly with 7 to 10 to 15. But all of a sudden, in 2016, there is a decision. It's a good decision for the financial viability of the system, right? But then it has unintended consequences that we'll delve in now. All of a sudden, in 2016, the decision was to raise this minimum insurable wage to £400 to be scheduled for every year, to be scheduled an increase of 25%, when we were increasing every year with 10% and 7%. So the legacy of the system, that was the minimum insurable wage was really low, and then the employer can actually choose this minimum insurable wage as a bracket to contribute, to pay for the worker, especially lower productivity workers or workers with lower wages. So employers would actually insure on the minimum insurable wage, but then with the sudden rise in the minimum insurable wage, employers are faced by substantially higher minimum insurable wage they have to insure their workers with, even if workers receive below wages. But then with the law in 2020, now the minimum insurable wage was £1,000. This is in current prices. I'll show you the real prices in a bit. And it's scheduled to reach 3,200 Egyptian pound in 2028. Now, today is 2023. The minimum insurable wage is 1,700. But then I'll tell you in the policy implication, small news that maybe Dr. Mervat Sabrin can enlighten us toward. Okay, what is the implication of the minimum insurable wage? Data from the ELMPS tell us something. If we divide workers through the wage distribution into 5 quintiles, the bottom 20% of regular wage workers in the private sector pay 40% as contribution. And this is why? Partly for 2 reasons. Either the wage is below the minimum insurable wage, so they actually pay on what they don't receive, so 40%, or that by the red dot, this is 36%, or that their employers do not pay and take the 40% all from them. So this is partly by 2 reasons. And then if we look at if we follow the red dot, so the workers in the first wage quintile or the bottom 20 pay 40% of contribution, whereas workers in the 5th quintile pay only 10% of their contribution. And this is because of the maximum bound, because those folks receive higher wage than the maximum wage. And then those in the middle, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quintile, are between the minimum and maximum, so we have an average of 14%, and this actually validates that the ELMPS data actually reflects what's the real cost of the system. We know that the cost of the system is 14% paid by the worker from the legal, and this is actually matching the legal framework. But then the line, there is a line, this is the percentage covered, and we see that coverage goes slightly up with the wage quintile. So the least coverage is among those who actually cannot pay, or where the cost is very high. But then, so I said the minimum insurable wage increased. How is that reflected in the data? Now, moving to the real terms. So this is the real monthly wage in dark blue, and then there is the dotted line is the real minimum insurable wage. And then what we see here, that between 2015 and 2016, the minimum insurable wage in real terms increased faster than the real monthly wage. So it used to be, the real minimum insurable wage used to be around 17%, or as a ratio, it used to represent 17% to 11% of the real monthly wage. Now, it's 27% in 2016, but also reaching almost 50% of the real monthly wage in real terms, 46%. Again, why is this important? And why is this important that the minimum insurable wage is such a high percentage of, or like a high relative to what workers receive? Let's see this by wage quintiles. Now, I know this is very tiny. If we look at the first panel, which is the first wage quintile, the red line is actually the ratio of minimum insurable wage to real monthly wage, in real terms. So ratio of minimum insurable wage to what the worker actually receive. And we find that starting 2016, the real minimum insurable wage is actually exceeding what they receive. So in 2021, it's 1.5 times what a worker in the bottom 20 would receive. So contribution is massive for them. Now, the second wage quintile is basically the minimum insurable wage is basically 100% reached. In 2021, it reached 100% of all what they receive. So it's not only expensive for them, but it's becoming expensive for their employers. Employers used to use the minimum insurable wage, the low wage, to insure the workers. Now, the minimum insurable wage is actually their full wage for the second wage quintile, and 75% of their wage in the third wage quintile, and 1.5 times if you're a low wage worker in the first wage quintile. Okay, so the scheme became very much less affordable for employers and workers, especially in the low wage workers, and that is where we argue the decline is coming from. The bottom 20, the second bottom 20, and I hope the next presentation would also show this in a more clear way as well. So again, as these costs, what are the benefits? Now, there is several dilemmas here. Now, not every participating wage worker in the private sector will get a retirement pension. Yes, not every. There are conditions, and as in every social insurance scheme around the world, right? What are the conditions and how is it adapted to Egypt's labor market realities of today? Now, pension eligibility is 10 years in case of retirement age, disability, or survivor. So in case I'm 60, I have to accumulate at least 10 years. Okay. 20 years for otherwise. What otherwise? Like women who drop out of the labor market? Yes, but I'll tell more. So no retirement pension in case of not meeting the minimum required, and this is very understandable because this has been the case in all schemes of the world. But the implication is that this scheme was adapted to public sector jobs, right? Public sector jobs, a job for life. Then people can accumulate as many years as they need, right? But then this is not really the case of Egypt's labor market today. So Egypt's labor market today, we have workers who drop out early at marriage, so they don't have enough time, the 10 years to have it. But also women, I note women are one of the most penalized groups. When they can enter the labor market again, late, when their children are bigger or are older, then they don't have also time to reach the 10 years. Now, women are one of the most penalized groups, but with also the rise in new entrants who are likely to be in jobs now with no social insurance coverage, and as we'll see in one of the presentation in the afternoon, they have also low chances to transition to formal jobs. So the scheme would like a worker with no fluctuation and a steady job. The idea of a rise of new entrants without formal jobs is actually not adapting as well the scheme. So the scheme does not favor those young people who move between jobs with all the cumbersome regulation in portability of social insurance, and the employer here stops the process and the other one initiates the process. It's very complicated now. So what I want to say is the scheme is becoming exclusive to a select group in the labor market, those who have the potential of accumulate as many years, those who have the potential to remain in one job or two across their careers, or 3, right? But then there is another issue, is that employers may enroll some, but not all workers, formal employers, for sure. And that's for fear of increased taxation. With each additional worker that the employer plans to insure, he's having the risk of a taxation authority, which is different and distinct from the National Organization of Social Insurance, the NOSI. So he runs the fear that the taxation authority comes and tells him this additional worker should have bring you an extra productivity of such, and then your revenue will go in such tranche and segment, even though this formal employer could have been submitting accurate tax statements every year. So there is a fear of increased taxation, which is a real one. Now, I feel my time is running out. I'm not going to show you the multivariate analysis, but the multivariate analysis validates most of what we say. The bit that I wanted also to tell you about the occupations. Who are the least likely? These are service workers, shop and sales workers. And these are, we argue that these are the people, because we have control for everything else, these are the people with the least potential to accumulate as many years as possible within the same job or within the same 2-3 jobs. Now we'll skip that. Key takeaways. Now, despite of the law's clear intention and commitment to include informal worker, as Dr. Ghada said, legal informality exists. Insurance is not obligatory. There is no penalty for irregular workers, for some groups of workers, for unpaid family workers, not in syndicated occupation, etc. And the enterprise formality is a precondition for coverage, and that's really important for our policy discussion. Now, there are system disincentives through the cost of the scheme. I spent so much talking about the minimum insurable wage, but also there are other system disincentives, which is the restricted access to pension to those who accumulate less, favoring those who can actually accumulate more, and this is not anymore adapted to Egypt's labor market realities, unfortunately. But then there is no health insurance for employers and self-employed, and this is a huge disadvantage for them. Now, moving to the policy discussion, there are so many policy discussions and implications. I'll focus on 4. Coming back to the first table, which is the distribution of informality by poverty and poverty by informality, there is around 62% of workers who are neither poor nor informal. They're left completely without any way to protect against risks. And this means vulnerability. This means a high risk for falling into poverty. We want to save the middle class, yes? We all want to save the middle class. We should do something about them, because this is the middle class slipping into poverty, and we know. Now, minimum wage. Oh, that's the bit. Now, according to one of the recent statements, they're going to use the minimum wage, not the minimum insurable wage. Now, we know that there is a minimum wage now in the private sector set at 2,400. Now, they're going to use the minimum wage as the minimum insurable wage for regular wage workers. And then the other minimum insurable wage that I show you will be for the irregular wage workers who do not have a regular pay slips or something like that. So this is a very much higher cost expected, especially for employers, formal employers in small and micro enterprises, whose workers do not receive 2,400. But then they'll have to pay for that. Now, there is an important bit here. The policy rationale considered social insurance a privilege that depends on enterprise formality. So if the enterprise is not formal, this employer is totally deprived of social insurance. He cannot enroll, or she cannot enroll. But now we need to think to change the paradigm of this. The paradigm shouldn't be about to formalize the informal. The paradigm should be that the employer can actually cover himself or herself in social insurance when he or she can afford and is like wants. But then the thing is that because of this restriction, we lose so many contributions from these employers and self-employed, and then we complain that the fiscal space is so tight for social assistance, because these people will likely to rely on takaful and karoma and social assistance, etc., etc. But if they have been productive and contributing during their work years, we now cross-subsidize and alleviate the fiscal pressure from the government a little bit. So we need to think about a productive paradigm shift. contributing is not a privilege. Contributing is an entitlement, is a right, as we also discussed. Now, and the last bit is irregular worker. As Dr. Ghada said, there is limited outreach, but also possibly unattainable regulation documents that the irregular workers need to provide in order to join the system. And thank you so much for bearing with me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Iran. We go directly to our commentators. Aya Gabr, National Coordinator for Social Protection at the ILO Cairo office. She also works very closely with the Egyptian government on the implementation of the new social protection reforms and the extension of social protection to informal workers. Aya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank ERF for this amazing conference, and I think the discussion is very timely, especially that we can see the government efforts to extend social protection, especially to informal workers. I also would like to thank Dr. Ghada and Dr. Erni for their thank you, for their great work. Such a very interesting and informative paper. And as ILO, actually, we are working very closely with the National Organization for Social Insurance on the extension of coverage. And reading this paper, I would like to bring it a little bit to the ground and the work that we are doing to the ground. I think the paper addressed several concerns that we see when we are talking to the workers' representatives. Many concerns such as the affordability of the system, the flexibility of the system, especially for informal workers, raising awareness and knowing about the system and the rights of the population, and also the exclusion of some of the benefits, especially the short-term benefits for the self-employed and informal workers who might be more interested in those short-term benefits that kind of address their immediate needs, such as the maternity, unemployment, and work injury. So I think the paper actually addressed several of those concerns and highlighted many aspects that we face on the ground. I have a couple of comments regarding the paper. First of all, I don't think we can consider the system in Egypt as a pay-as-you-go system, because there is a fund and the contributions that's being collected is managed through this fund and invested. So I don't think it's considered as a pay-as-you-go. I also don't think that we can consider it as a legal informality.
No. If you talk about the finance mechanism for the past loan, this is fully for the current loan, finance pay as you go. This is not accurate information, please.
Thank you very much.
Yes. ILO's partner with Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Social Solidarity. When we design the system and put the finance mechanism.
Yes. I will ask you to introduce yourself in the Q&A section and make your point so it's clear to everybody. The floor is yours till you finish your point, and then we'll take the discussion.
Now, as Dr. Mervat mentioned, we can say that the system is a pay-as-you-go system. Is a financing mechanism is based on the contributions that's being made by the workers and the employers, and those contributions are being invested through the fund to kind of finance the system and ensure its long-term sustainability. Regarding the legal informality, I also don't think we can argue that, because legally speaking, the law provides a mandatory coverage for everyone except for the Egyptians working abroad. It's the only scheme that is voluntary, but for the rest of the workers, the scheme is mandatory. Of course, there is a gap between the legal coverage and the effective coverage, but this also happens in so many countries. So I can say we can't really argue that the law is legalizing the informality of irregular workers or self-employed. Of course, there is challenges when it comes to the implementations, and the way to go is to address those challenges in order to make both the legal coverage and the effective coverage equivalent. I think the issue of the increase of the minimum insurable wage is very interesting, and it actually echoes some of our studies. At the ILO, we are conducting the actuarial valuation for the pension system in Egypt, and the actuarial valuation mainly looks at the financial sustainability of the system, and our initial analysis actually shows that wages is a major issue that is going to impact the financial sustainability of the system. As it is now, wages are very, very low, either because people are underreporting or because they are actually receiving low wages, and in the long term, this is going to affect the reserves and the financial sustainability. So I think the analysis you have conducted is very interesting, because I think we need to look at wages in the bigger picture in Egypt, and to see how wages and productivity actually is impacting the system. So maybe increasing the insurable system is essential for the financial sustainability, but I think we also need to look how to create this balance between creating an incentive for the worker and make the system affordable, while at the same time maintaining the financial sustainability of the system. My last point is actually about the data that was used for the analysis. I know you have mentioned that you are using the labor force survey, and I think it's very interesting what you have done, very informative. But I think maybe it would be also good to look to use the administrative data for NOSI. They are published by, some of them are published by CABMAS, and maybe do like some comparison between, especially when it comes to the coverage rate and the trends. NOSI actually shared some of those data with the CABMAS, and every year they publish like a periodic publication. So might be interesting to look and compare the rates of the coverage and the trends in the coverage. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we go straight to Dr. Abdurrahman Nagy, Director of Learning and Strategy at the Sawiris Foundation for Social Development. He leads efforts in learning, evaluations, capacity building, research, policy, and innovation. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me. And it's great to comment on the Rini and Ghada's paper. It's actually very, very interesting. And very briefly, again, as you all know, that because of the Ukrainian-Russia war and because of the impact of COVID-19 and now what's happening in Gaza, the number of poor people is expected to increase a lot. It's already increased a lot over the last 1 or 2 years, but expecting also to increase a lot over the next years. And again, it's highlighting the importance of providing social protection programs, including for sure the social insurance, with no doubt, right? The paper actually highlights a lot of very, very, very interesting points, but I can't cover everything that I like it, because I like it a lot of points in the paper, but I can cover, just give examples of what I like it so much. One, basically, is highlighting the difficulty of required documentation and the focus on a specific occupation that basically shows this is not available, or like it's not a good design for all people across Egypt, which is a high risk. Again, the second is substantial increase in minimum insurable wage upon which contributions are calculated. This is very, very also high risk, could be dismotivating for especially firms owners, right? Third, also highlighting the risk of the current social insurance scheme, which disincentivizes both employers and employees, as well as self-employed people, to join the social insurance program, which is, again, very, very valid points, and I can go till tomorrow sharing and thinking about the beauty of this paper. However, there are a few, and they actually let me highlight again that it's not very far from the global evidence when it comes to social protection. So one thing that basically we can see in, for example, in the paper for Dane Carlin and others, that basically the importance of having an incentivized and effective commitment, right? Because basically now, when people think about social insurance, they think about this is something we are committing to it now, but we are getting in the future, which is uncertain. We don't know exactly if they will still be there or not. And again, the value of the money they are putting now will not be the same when they got the money back in a few years, 10 or 20, whatever. So again, this is very, very important, and think about the psychological aspect of the people is super, super important. The second thing that is basically aligning also with the global evidence is the timing of the insurance, right? Because now when you think about the timing of the insurance, and again I'm referring here to the paper for Caspary and Wells, is basically highlighting that the timing and when basically we're asking people or encouraging them to enroll in the social insurance is very, very critical. And now because of the economic shock, this can basically tell us a lot. However, and again, as Dr. Naveen mentioned today, targeting is very, very critical, and it's super important. And when we talk about social protection, as Ben Olken mentioned in several papers, we have three main challenges for social protection. One is targeting, second is design, third is accountability. It would be great if we can look into this paper from the perspective, like how is this really targeting the right people or not? If I think the paper spoke a lot about the design and how it's a good design or not, but probably if we can speak a little bit about the targeting as well as accountability, because this risk of basically employers who are not enrolling their employees is definitely impacting the accountability side, because we can see a lot of financial leakages here. So this will be very, very interesting. A few points I think would be very, very valuable to highlight, and for people who know me, I love experimental research, I love RCTs, so definitely we need to be careful for this. Although everything we're saying here is correlations, right? Which is still great, it's telling us a lot. But it will be really amazing if we can think about how we can experiment this. And I'm thinking a lot about like using encouragement design here. Like you can think about using encouragement design with firms when we can encourage them to enroll their employees and measure the impact of this social insurance on their employees' productivity and mental health. We have a lot of evidence about the correlation or like causal impact actually between mental health as well as the productivity, which we can rely on here. I can think for a lot of reasons that can basically reduce can lead to this negative impact that we saw. For example, and simply information barrier, right? So people do not know, right? Especially if we are thinking about the self-employment. We do not know anything about the social insurance law, and because we do not know, we will not get enrolled, simply, right? And employers, they also do not know what is the benefits that we'll get out of enrolling our employee in this kind of system, right? This will be good for us or not. If it's just about cost, if it's good for them, there's not enough incentive for them to enroll their employees, because you need to think about what could be the benefit from a productivity perspective as well, right? I can also think about the value of the money. Again, people are putting Egyptian pound now, right? And they'll be getting money back in 20 years, right? And if I'm putting over or like 10,000 pounds, even if I'll get a 200,000 pound, I cannot guarantee this will be a good investment, right? Because we do not know exactly what will be the value of the money within the next 10 or 20 years. So it would be better for me just to invest my money in gold, or like if I have connections or for people that are living outside, just to get some dollars or euros, right? So this will be a much secured investment for me, right? Also the impact of economic shock, and because of the economic shock and in relation to what I said about the timing, it's very critical, right? Because now, especially if I'm self-employed, you're asking me to be enrolled in a social insurance program, and the first thing that I think about like how I can cover the immediate need that I need for myself and for my family, right? So it's still very, very hard. Also, you mentioned the gig sector, but very important also to think about the migration that we are noticing now over the last few years for the gig sector from Egypt to other countries, as well as the nature of the gig sector itself. So most of the contracts for the gig sector are consultancy-based or short-term contracts, right? What else? Yeah, I'm also thinking about like using administration data, and I agree that accessing administration data is very, very hard. However, then something that I personally would love to help with is to give you some access to like social protection data under the Ministry of Information and Communication, where they have a lot of access to this data, and they have a lot of very beautiful data that hopefully can help you guys in making a very strong case. I'm not sure how much money, how much time I have, sort of money. But basically, again, this topic is super, super important from a policy perspective, right? You highlighted and you quoted and cited this paper for Ragi about the percentage of youth, the 40%, who will basically be turned in the next few years to be elder people who will need social insurance from the government. And it means that more money that the government will need to invest in social insurance, and the less money they will be getting back because these people will be getting elder in the next few years, which is super, super important and highlights the importance of your topic, right? And again, you think about, there's also this important aspect of the financial sustainability of the system, because social insurance is one important source of income for the public budget, right? And if this number is reducing, this is also very risky. One last thing that I would like to highlight is, it could be also related to what we are seeing here, is the reduction in the female labor force participation. So in Egypt now, according to the World Bank, the female labor force participation is 15%, which is putting Egypt and Jordan as the lowest countries across the globe when it comes to female labor force participation in non-war countries, right? This is a huge risk. Because if you looked into my paper with Adam Osman and Brian Field, you also see that basically women, they highly value social insurance, medical insurance, and this kind of stuff. And if we are seeing a reduction in female labor force participation as a result of many reasons, it's very possible also that a lot of people who really like to be enrolled in this kind of protection system will be reduced. Otherwise, I would like to thank you so much for this again. Very beautiful paper, amazing topic. I really liked it, and I'm very much looking forward to have more papers experimenting with different ideas and really explain to us what is the causal relationship between what we are seeing and this result. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Before I give the floor back to our speakers to respond to some of our commentators' comments, I'd like to see if we have questions from the floor, and if you would like to introduce yourself and make the point so that then our colleagues can get back to you.
Thank you. Please, I will give my intervention in Arabic to simplify the information. يعني أنا اسمي ميرفت صابرين، مساعد وزير التضامن لشبكات الحماية والأمان الاجتماعي، وكنت بشتغل قبل كده يعني مع دكتور معيط، يعني حاليا هو وزير المالية، وكنا شغالين على إصلاح نظام المعاشات من أول 2007 وصدورا بقانون في 2010 قانون كان خاص بالتأمينات الاجتماعية، وتم إلغائه في 2013، وبدأنا محاولة تانية بعد الثورة إن احنا برضو بنصلح نظام المعاشات، وبدأنا الإصلاح من أول 2014. وسريعا يعني لأنه يعني نظام المعاشات من أكثر النظم تعقيدا في مظلة الحماية الاجتماعية، لأنه بيبقى على صانع السياسة عبء شديد وهو بيصمم أو بيعمل أي إصلاح في المنظومة، إن هو محتاج يبص من أول الوضع الديموغرافي للوضع المالية العامة، للوضع الاقتصادي، لوضع سوق العمل، لكيفية تحرك الأجور في داخل الدولة. وعشان كده يعني دكتور إيرين لما اتكلمت على موضوع إنه ارتفاع معدل الأجور التأمينية بمعدل أكبر من الأجور الفعلية، ودي كانت مشكلة إحنا واجهناها لما كنا بنشتغل على إصلاح المنظومة. أنا أول مشكلة عندي وتواجه النظام بالفعل، سواء النظام السابق أو النظام الحالي، إحنا ما عندناش حد أدنى للأجور في القطاع غير المنظم، وحتى الحد الأدنى للأجور في القطاع الخاص هو ليس ملزم، ولكن بتطلع قرارات من المجلس القومي للأجور، ولكن حضرتك ما تقدريش تروحي للقطاع الخاص ولو شفتي في القوائم المالية إنه بيدي عامل أقل من 3,500 حاليا اللي في القطاع الخاص، ما تقدريش توقعي عليه عقوبة، لأنه ما فيش أي شيء ملزم من الدولة إنه يطبق الحد الأدنى. وبالتالي لما يجي عند حضرتك في البيت عامل ودي عمالة غير منتظمة، لو حضرتك اديتي له 100 جنيه هو ما يقدرش يقول لا ده مش أجر عادل، لأنه الدولة لم تحدد على المستوى القومي أجر حد أدنى للأجر. وبالتالي هنا دي الدايلاما اللي بتحصل. يعني ليه النظام قال إن احنا يعني نبدأ نحط حد أدنى للأجور؟ قبل 2014 لم يكن هناك حد أدنى للأجور التأمينية في القانون، ولكن تم وضعه في 2014 لما حطينا 400 جنيه، وفي نفس الوقت غيرنا في القانون أو المخطط التأميني الخاص بالعمالة غير المنتظمة لما بدأنا نحط له معدل اشتراك. قبل كده كان بيدفع جنيه في الشهر لمدة 10 سنين، وبعد كده وكان بيحصل تحايل على المنظومة إنه ممكن يوصل عند سن 65 قبلها بشهر يروح يدفع 120 جنيه. جنيه في الشهر، يعني 12 جنيه في السنة لمدة 10 سنين، يدفع 120 جنيه، وكان بيحصل على حد أدنى للمعاش كان حوالي 200 جنيه، بل بالعكس كان أبيوز بشكل كبير، إنه ممكن يخصم اشتراكاته اللي هي ال 120 جنيه من المعاش اللي هياخده، بالتالي هو ما بيدفعش حاجة وبيروح ياخد يعني معاش. فعشان كده كانت في احنا بدأنا نحط ان احنا نزود الحد الادنى للاجر التاميني ب 25% 15% لغايه 2027، وبعد كده بعد 20 من اول 2028 هنبدا نزود بمعدل التضخم. هناك مشاكل خاصه بالنظام سواء حتى في النظام الحالي بعد اصلاحه، ودي مشاكل لا تخص تصميم النظام أكتر ما هي مشاكل خاصة بسوق العمل. سوق العمل لم ينظم حتى الآن، سوق العمل لم يعكس يعني الوظائف اللي تم تخليقها نتيجة للتغيرات الاقتصادية أو للتطور التكنولوجي الهائل، لم يعكس هذه الوظائف بحيث ان هو ينظمها علشان نظام التأمينات الاجتماعية يبدأ يغطيها. وعشان كده دايما بنقول القانون قال سواء العاملين لدى نفسهم اللي هم السيلف امبلويد او الريجولار وركرز ان هو حط بعض الوظائف، ولكن قال ورئيس مجلس الإدارة ان هو يصدر قرارات يضم الفئات. كل ما سوق العمل يفرز وظائف جديده هو بالفعل بيروح بيطلع، وعملناها آلية بسيطه انه مجلس اداره الهيئه يطلع قرار يضم هذه الناس وفقا للمنظومه. ولكن للاسف محتاجين نظبط سوق العمل، محتاجين نظبط الاجور. عندنا ما زالت لما بتكلم عن القطاع الحكومي او القطاع الخاص ما زالت الزياده السنويه 7% مقارنه ان انت بتزودي، يعني لينا سنتين بنزود المعاشات ب 15%، وده طبعا بيأثر. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا جدا. Any other questions, comments from the floor before I get back to our speakers?
Thank you. I'm Rasha Hassan. I'm a research consultant and I'm working at the Standing Supreme Committee for Human Rights. I just have two questions for Dr. Erin and Dr. Ghada. Really thank you so much for your great paper, and thank you for Dr. Abdurrahman for saying or mentioning some of my comments of what I wanted to highlight. But first I was wondering about the social insurance, and people may not, in general, from the qualitative side, we found from previous research that people maybe not like to apply for to register for social insurance in general, and even if there are if the employers wanted to register for them, they will refuse for applying, because like Dr. Niveen Kabaj said earlier in the morning, that the mentality of احييني النهارده وموتني بكره, it's generic a little bit, particularly among poor people. Second question is about the qualitative issue, or also for it's not qualitative, sorry, but it's I want, when you talked about the rights and there is an inequality when we applied the, maybe I would prefer to talk in Arabic, sorry. لما اتكلمتوا عن العدالة وفكرة ان النظام الحماية التأمينات الاجتماعية موجودة، يعني it's not equal، خصوصا لما احنا حطينا القوانين. انا كنت متخيلة ان ممكن نعمل دوت على فكرة العدالة التوزيعية، على العدالة الجغرافية. فهل في اي داتا بتقول لنا ان فين اكتر على مستوى المحافظات، كمان لو احنا كنا عملناها على القرى الاكثر فقرا، هل ده في اي داتا حوالين الموضوع ده؟ شكرا.
شكرا جدا. I'll give the floor back to our speakers and panelists. Dr. Ghada, would you like to go first?
Sure. If this works, yeah, it's working. For a long time, I thought I was barking at the wrong tree, because we're talking about the design of social insurance and whether it's pay as you go, or is it fully funded or initially funded, and these are things we read in reports and in papers, but this is not a conversation topic. I mean, very unusual to have this as a conversation topic. So I'm very happy to have it here as a conversation topic. I mean, I really want to thank the ERF for allowing the space for this, to sit with Dr. Merva, to sit with Aya, to sit with Abdurrahman, and to sit with everybody in the room and talk about the design issues of social insurance. Because, I mean, I teach public policy, and we say in public policy there are wicked problems that cannot be solved with one solution. And social insurance design is definitely one of those wicked issues. You fix it from one side, you break it from the other side. Whether it's a pay-as-you-go or a social, and whether it's legal informality or illegal informality. So we spent hours debating this. So this is probably a conversation for those who enjoy this kind of debate, because I personally do, but I don't think everyone in the room will be ready to engage in this. Admin data, I wish it's available. Sometimes there are the tables, not the data. So the tables will just summarize, but then the admin data, it's hardly available. It definitely would enrich our analysis for sure. One of the key issues, we did not have a chance to discuss this, one of the key challenges is that you have to contribute for 10 years in order to receive pension. So a lot of analysis shows that this is a deterrent. Because if I've been working in the informal economy for all my life, and then there's a chance for me to contribute, I will not contribute, because I know I will not be able to accumulate the 10 years to basically 120 months in order to receive social insurance. So we were doing this analysis, and we wanted to know how many people actually contribute less than 120 months, so that they lose the opportunity of getting a pension. Instead, they get the bonus. And we could not get that. We tried to get it from survey data, but we could not get it. So this kind of data is very important, and it's not really readily available. I will jump to your question on the geographic distribution. Erin made the analysis on occupations. And occupations tell a lot about the story on who gets access. So if you are a rural worker, a rural agricultural worker, it's too bad there's no access to social insurance in these contexts. So it's by the occupation we can definitely tell the geographic distribution. I'm sorry I'm not answering all the questions, but because there is a lot that can be chewed on afterwards. Erin?
I would like to thank you all for the comments. I'm learning as I'm hearing all the rich discussion. I thank Dr. Mervat Sobrin for her intervention. I was looking forward to hearing and learning from her because of all the efforts she put towards reforming the system. And I hope one day we can have a social insurance system that we are proud of and happy and know that the unintended consequences are being minimized. Now, a very important debate point. Do workers want social insurance or not? Back to Russia's question. I honestly believe that if a worker is being offered a social insurance enrollment to later a guaranteed pension, he wouldn't say no, or she wouldn't say no. That's my genuine belief, right? There is no data to back up if workers say no when their employers offer. But actually the data is towards saying that employers find it costly for some workers to be enrolled because these workers do not have the potential to accumulate as many years and also do not stay in the same job for so many years. So the evidence is actually towards rather the employer side, because the process is basically employer initiated. It's not a worker initiated. So the accountable here should be the employer, not the worker. But then with the disincentives of the system, if an informal worker who spent 15 years of his life, 20 years of his life in informal work or in work without social insurance coverage, and she or he is being offered an enrollment, they won't accept it. Not because they don't want it, but because there is no guaranteed benefit for these payment losses. But then there is also myopia, and then we need to work on that. People cannot, yes, there is this myopic behavior is being documented in all research about social insurance coverage. And then we need to work on that, how to help people overcome the myopic behavior and the pressures of consumption and inflation of today towards a guaranteed pension tomorrow. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we've got one more burning issue. Okay.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough for this very informative session. Very quickly, a few points that I think we should address in the next research, hopefully. I really don't think that we really, at any point, we addressed why we should be enrolled in social insurance. Right? This is not clear for employers. This is not clear for employees, right? And probably this basically something we need to be addressed. And I don't mean that why we should be enrolled in social insurance overall, but I mean why people would be motivated to be enrolled in this social insurance system according to this law, right? This is something I think this should be addressed. And if this is clear, probably I do think there is an information barrier here for employees and for employers as well. Again, after we address this, probably it might be very useful to think about how we can provide social insurance, right? Because I don't think that one size fits all, right? And we should definitely have different versions of the social insurance system. And I don't think it's this issue of like only formal jobs. The whole thing is about having an attractive and interesting social insurance system that can motivate people to be self-enrolled on it, right? You would like to be part of it. If it's not only about making it a must-do thing for former or employers or employees, because this is not how it works. People, if they don't think this is useful, they will find a way not to be enrolled. And I do think this might be the case here, by a way or another. They don't think this is a good investment. And there's a lot of literature about the saving. It's very, very similar to it. Like, why I do saving, if I do saving now, it's better for me or not? If this really helped me to face shock in the future or not? This is questions that we would love to address and to find answers for. And I don't think that we have any answer for these questions in Egypt so far. But yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you very much. Aya, do you have a last word? Just to be fair.
Thank you. Just my last word is that, of course, you need to create incentives and to improve communication in order to extend the coverage. But I think we also need to look at the inspection side and enforcement of the law as well. I think we need also to invest in that, to have more labor inspection and to kind of try to enforce and ensure the enforcement of the law. Thank you.
آخر burning قوي
قوي that we do have evidence that people want to join. We do have the evidence. We've analyzed the data. I remember we've looked at ELMPS 2012 and ELMPS 2018. People want to work in the public sector for one single reason, because of access to social insurance. We've done so many interviews with people. They really want to be insured. And we've shown in the table that, yes, there are people who are ultra poor, they cannot join, but there are people who can afford it, and it's systemic. That's our argument with the paper. So I wanted to say that because it's the crux of our argument.
Thank you.
That's how we're wasting so much time on this.
All. And on this note, we thank the panel for an excellent discussion. And so we have to thank you first. And I think you'd be invited to have coffee and bring it back to the table. Thanks, Hoda, for making it easier to have the cookies at the table at least. So, and we'll be starting the next session in 10 minutes. I was hoping to give at least 10 minutes with Dr. Megid Osman chairing the session, and we'll be hearing from Dr. Raghi and Sarah Wahbi on why is social insurance coverage declining in Egypt.